the last year has been a difficult one for everyone, right? But 2021 seems to be looking up, and even in 2020 there were some decent investments going out there. So, what's your outlook for 2021, especially when you look at the tech, deep tech sector, and also other sectors from a digitization perspective?
Sure. Prasad, thanks, Anurag, Prasad, thanks to Business World for having me on. Pleasure to be here. So, it's interesting, right? We're exactly a year since the pandemic started. And in one sense, a lot has changed. In another sense, not much has changed. I think the sea change, if you will, was that, closer back home, if you think of Reliance Jio, it really put India was always on the map, but I think it put us on the digital map even more. It was a landmark deal, and in one sense, also not just in terms of the scale of the deal, but also how it bridged the digital and the non-digital world, right? Because you've got a conglomerate like a behemoth, which is really non-digital besides the payments and the telecom and infrastructure business it has, and lot of corporates and the world is thinking, how do we become digital now? And in fact, almost, I think the question to ask is like, what proportion of your business is not digital, right, today versus the other way around? So we've got consulting firm friends, partners who come to us and say, a lot of our clients are asking us, for help with their digital strategy, and I think that's a great way where startups fit in because you can advise them on strategy and business direction, but startup tech and the platforms are really the ones that make that happen. So that's a macro reference point to go in. I think specifically you asked about sectors. It really depends on where you sat. So for example, you asked about tech. You look at global SaaS, right? I think what 2020 also showed is that that great software and great platforms can be built from anywhere and are being built from anywhere and everywhere. UiPath, which is one of the leaders in robotic process automation, came out from Romania. You've got Canva, which a lot of us use, which came out from Australia. And I think it's almost like a Y2K opportunity reimagined and revisited for the B2B software industry, right? Where you're building this from Bangalore, Pune, Gurgaon, and that's a huge opportunity. So global SaaS. The other part is that Freshworks, if you look at it, it's crossed reportedly 300 million ARR, right? Which is a massive number, right? I mean, this is not valuation, not a vanity metric, but a real like a Thanda metric. And you're seeing a lot of B2B SaaS unicorns happen, Zenoti and iCertis and of course Postman and many others. That's again great news from India. I think on the consumer side, EdTech, we have our own unicorn, Unacademy. So EdTech saw a huge tailwind. I think 2020 just accelerated that virtual learning trend even more. It was bound to happen, already happening. It just accelerated it. So certain sectors have been more beneficiaries of that. Last point you asked about deep tech. We've got Pixel, which is a space tech startup, which they're building in nano satellites, and once that goes into space, that is going to basically use hyperspectral imagery, and then that data will be used by large MNCs, right? So ML, AI, robotics, space tech is also taking off, which was not the case 5-10 years ago. So overall, in spite of the pandemic, a lot of bullishness for the Indian tech landscape.
Right. And so what are the key sectors that you're looking at for this year? Probably the next 2 or 3 years, because the next 2 or 3 years also will be guided by, the views that have been formed in the last 12 months. So what's your outlook for this year and the next 2 or 3?
Sure. It's interesting. One thing I'll say is that the lines between the typical tech and non-tech investors are blurring, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples. We've done a company called Leverage EDU in EdTech, which is really a platform that helps students, apply to foreign universities and has tools and, content, right, to help them. And in one sense, another example is like Dunzo, right? If you think about it, is this a brand or is this a tech platform? And the investors that have come together actually have crossed those lines. So in Leverage.edu, we've got DSG Partners, which is typically a consumer brand, VC, and Bloom come in. In Dunzo, it's very interesting. You have Google, right, which is very interested in the data points. because Dunzo has fantastic data on the consumption patterns, right, of users. And then you have Lightbox, which is a consumer brand VC, and then you have Bloom, right? So, to answer your questions, we're seeing those lines cross, which was not the case about 5-10 years ago. So in terms of sectors, I think on EdTech is certainly very interesting because, we are all on Zoom, we're all learning, we are consuming content, EdTech, gaming, vernacular content in that sense, which are really the, your phone today, your phone and your computer are your biggest learning and consumption tool today. So those sectors are interesting. On the SaaS side, I would say, SaaS itself, different flavors. You've got vertical SaaS, for example, Innovacer, which is in the US, going after hospital chains. We've got an interesting testing platform called Lambda Test, which is basically around developer tools. So that's a huge sector. The fact that people are building communities around developer tools, and that can happen anywhere, whether it's Bangalore, Noida, Romania, and then deep tech, right? With deep tech is really everything from. It's interesting. We didn't have a deep tech thesis, but today we have a drone thesis. A thesis around robotics, around autonomous ground vehicles. So we've become much sharper in general as an ecosystem at a deeper level for thesis development.
Excellent. So, I think we get a great insight on a number of sectors from what you said. But there are a couple of other sectors that we thought are interesting themes for the next couple of years. Now, they may not be of direct interest to you, but we'd like to really hear your view. So one of them is SCM, right? Obviously, with GST, supply chain has become an exciting sector in India. But the last year has seen companies that depend on supply chain and supply chain companies themselves scaling up rapidly. So what's your view on the SCM sector? And, is there something there that interests you? Or, how do you see that sector going?
Yeah. I'll extrapolate SCM into the logistics sector. We've got a couple of investments. One of them is Routematic, which is basically has a platform that helps, commuters, right? Partners with corporates and helps move people around and has an algorithm. And then Locus, which is which is really positioning itself as a decision-making supply chain tool, right? For leading SCM, CXOs, for decision makers around supply chain. So, supply chains are becoming disrupted, right? Right from ocean to freight to all levels in that value chain, and it's really the nuts and bolts, right? If you think about, we all talk about CRM and front end marketing and the front facing part, but supply chain is huge. It's a huge area for technology disruption, and if you think about it, it's an interesting line. That I feel that one of the biggest beneficiaries of new technology is actually going to be the old economy, or rather is, right? So if you think about Grey Orange Robotics, one of our most scaled up and proudest companies, they basically make robotic solutions that automate warehouses, right? So you've got these massive warehouses that FMCG brands and other logistics companies use around the world that typically had humans, and these are some of the warehouses are miles and miles long, right? So you basically have these autonomous ground vehicles that move around. And if you think about it, a lot of startups actually run after other startups to sell, but an interesting market actually is the old economy, because they stand to benefit the most. And SCM is a great example, right? Think about warehouses, think about freight chains, whether it's cold storage, ripe for disruption. So I think I would say that I'm giving more of a global context, but that's very true in India also, right? From trucking to logistics, anything. The fact is that supply chains are very fragmented, and different levels of technology that can disrupt them.
Sure. No, I think that gives a great perspective. Yesterday, we were having a conversation where somebody mentioned that for us, supply chain or logistics is 14% of the cost of goods, whereas in China it's 8%. Right. So that's a huge gap to bridge, and if we're able to bridge that gap, we could leapfrog as an economy. Do you see that happening? From what you see in the SCM logistics sector, you see innovation being adequate enough to get us there?
Absolutely. I'm not an expert in China, but what I'll say is that again, 2020 has we're all much more immobile, right? In one sense, wherever we are, and certain industries will be disrupted, and the options are even greater. I think supply chain is exactly one of those. Is that now, how do you move around goods and at a attractive cost structure? I think China has been a master in that traditionally, right? We're being a manufacturing hub, whereas we have been a services hub. But if you look at the startups, the problems they're going after, routing, mapping, geocoding, delivery. If you look at trucking, right, Rivigo and Fortigo. I mean, the fact that now you've got the golden quadrilaterals, and you've got like a potential hyperloop happening. There's so much. The infrastructure itself is getting so much more advanced, right? And that is going to be have to be supported by technology as well. So I think it can only get better, and we don't often talk about, I would say, this less glamorous SEM, right? Because we all want to talk about Dream11 and about IPL and edtech, right? Because we are all impacted. That touches us much more. But I think the real I think agri-tech is another great sector, right? If you think about it, putting decision-making power, cutting out the middlemen, and these marketplaces that can put more money in the pockets of farmers, I think is again, like SEM, something that really, will impact the hinterland and the real Bharat, if you will.
Sure. Actually, that was going to be my next question. So we wanted to understand how you see agri-tech evolving. We've seen, for example, a country like Israel, right, for their own reasons, being a desert economy, focus on intensive agriculture, on agriculture technology, and now they've got some of the leading startups. And in India, obviously, technology can help agriculture scale up. Today, agriculture is 20% of the economy, right? But probably the productivity levels are far lower than they should be. So, have you seen any innovations in that sector that excite you? What you see is going to be the key changes and the key focus on this sector in the next couple of years to come?
Yeah, absolutely. You think about the maturity of the ecosystem, right? I mean, Mark, my friend who runs Omnivore Capital, right, which is the agri-tech focused fund. You think about it, right? Wow, if there's an agri-tech focused fund, then there's got to be innovation happening. That's all we do, right? That's one. Secondly, also to my earlier point about the lines of blurring, that what is a true agri-tech fund and what is it not, right? So, for example, just announced today that we have a space tech startup called Pixel, and Omnivore just announced today that they've also come into that, right? They've invested into that. Now it's very interesting, right? You've got a space tech startup that is making satellites that will go into space and that will use that imagery that large agri-tech companies can use, right, for better decision making, for saving costs, to basically reduce the carbon footprint, to improve, to tackle climate change. In one sense, it's a SaaS company. In another sense, it's a space tech company. In the third, it's an agri-tech company, right? So if you think about it, the applications are so large. Again, I'm not, my colleague Sajid Pai looks at the sector inside Bloom. But if you think about the different aspects, we have Tartan Sense, which is basically like a precision agri-tech robot that helps farmers accurately decide how much they should spray pesticide, when pesticide is less or more. You've got now another company, we have another portfolio company called Jai Kisan, which is actually on the lending space, like helping lending to that. So you have agri-tech that is touching in one space, fintech, deep tech, lending, and it's great to see that innovation. And Prasad, more interestingly, it's great to see founders who want to build for the sector, right? I think what is really interesting is that the founders self-select. In certain sectors, you tend to attract founders who really want to make a difference. Same true for gaming, right? I mean, Harsh Jain really wants people to have that power and have fun, and do it, have that control. So there's no noble or less noble. But I think what's interesting is that I'm finding the younger generation really cares a lot about these issues like climate change, agri-tech, about farmers, which was not necessarily true, about 10, 20 years ago.
Great. So I think, Sanjay, that gives us some insight into your views on various sectors. But now we'd like to kind of move on to get some insights on you and your approach to investing, as well as your view of the entire ecosystem. Now, as an investor, you have a unique perspective, right? You're obviously, putting in money into startups, so therefore you have to have a thesis, you have to have a philosophy.
Yeah.
But you also see startups where you see, that, what are they doing right, what are they doing wrong, why are they getting invested in, right? So I'd like to break it into two parts and understand first, as an investment professional, right? Tell us a little bit about what you think have been the key wins in your journey, and if there is an aspiring investment professional, right? What advice would you give to them in terms of, how do they go about it, and how can they learn from, what you have gained over the years?
Sure. So I'll tackle the first question first. This is a very long-term game, and to put it in perspective, this is our 10th year. In fact, next week we have our Bloom Day virtually. Of course, we were talking about that.
Right.
We have Unacademy, which became our first unicorn last year, and that was not from the first fund, from the middle fund. And this is a very long-term game, right? So I think when I look at quote-unquote successes, I think it is where we backed. I think what is common was that we backed a team that was very passionate about creating a really large difference in a space, not looking to get rich quick or creating wealth immediately. So if you look at the Grey Orange robotics founders, they started robotics in high school and then at BITS Pilani, they're my college juniors. And they had looked at this company that Amazon had acquired called Kiva, and really wanted to build from a global scale from day one. They won second prize at, I remember, some robotics challenge in Japan years ago when they were still students. I think the successes have come from founders who are really deeply obsessed about going very deep into a large problem, and then Unacademy, the same thing, right? If you look at Gaurav, the way he started, really wanted to democratize and bring these learners and educators to all over India. Today there is a retired or a stay-at-home mom in Bhopal or Indore who says, I can be a educator on and give back on the Unacademy platform, right? Earlier it was, you had to be part of a coaching school or you had to be in a big city. So they want to make that difference. I think you have to be great at not just an idea and visionary, but inspiring and carrying people along. I think that is common, right? Again, both these qualities have to do with people, where you're working with these people day in, day out. They have to like working with you. They have to look up to you. You've got to look at things like diversity. You can't just have, I think gone are the days where you just have, you pick 5 people from the same hostel because you went to school together and you need a diversity of views, not for the sake of, but because when you hit a wall, the diverse views are going to help you, not the same, thinking like you. To your second question about, so the companies that we're proud of, I mean, there's so many, right? I mean, if you see what Dunzo is doing, it's changed the way consumer behaviors, huge in Bangalore, I think starting slowly in Bombay also here. Grey Orange, of course, in the B2B space. Unacademy, I think everybody has heard about it. A Turtlement on the InsurTech space. Advice for investment professionals that you're asking about, I would say, again, a very long-term game. And I would say that, there are different ways to get involved with startups, right? So I like to say a lot of people feel, I have to do a startup to get involved with startups. I think there's so many ways. There's, one can become an angel investor, one can become a mentor, one can just volunteer time. A young person can help a startup with a business plan. I won't diverge this, but I know a company, that eventually in the US, where there was a business school student who helped them with the business plan. That company became massive, and then the founders had given him some stock on the cap table that VC then found out later, and that became that was a couple of $1 million for him, right? So because people, when you help people when they need it, they remember. Right. And so what I wanted to say is there's no one formula, but I think for young investment professionals, there's no better way to cut your teeth. You actually learn on those investments itself. You learn when you're doing thesis, you learn on the ground, right? In the boardrooms, working with these founders, and you learn the most when things are going wrong. When your whatever hits the fan, that's the time that the most learning occurs.
Great. So I think, obviously then that draws into, the investee companies themselves, right? You see a variety of companies that come to you, and obviously there's a selection process that you go through. But for founders, right? What's your advice, right? When is it that they should be looking to bootstrap? What's the right time to come and look to raise funds? I had a very interesting conversation a few days back where somebody said that, look, one of the key tenets of this entire ecosystem now has become how quickly, how much funding can you get, right? Now, I'm not very sure if I agree with that completely, right? But maybe that's something that succeeds in the business. But that leaves startups and their founders a little bit confused about what's the right time to go in. When do you bootstrap? When do you go to friends and family? And when do you go to institutions for investing?
Sure. This is such an interesting topic, and it's a long topic also. But I think if I had to share a couple of shorter insights, I'll say this also, like the media is also partly to not to blame, but for everything, right? I mean, today there's a 2 crore investment from angels, and that makes, that's 1/4 of a real estate page on Economic Times, right? We've also glorified and glamorized this more. All he's done is just raise capital to build something that he started with, right? It's okay. I'll say it really depends on the business plan, right? So, for example, you tend to find that in consumer businesses, something like a Byju, an academy, it's all about building trust. Now, to build trust, you have to raise some capital because you've got to acquire those customers, right? Typically, consumer behavior requires a change in behavior. I mean, any startup thrives on change in behavior. Somebody's gone to coaching classes offline. I mean, this is before the pandemic. And then you're introducing a new way of learning. You have to socialize that, right? You have to make it aware. So people have to, it's about building that trust, even in fintech. So consumer startups tend to raise a little more. I think the founders that do it well are the ones that do it naturally. And by the way, it is a skill. It is an important skill. But it should not be overplayed. You want founders to, I want founders to focus on 3 things, right? Hiring, working with a fantastic team. Second is building the product and selling it. And then capital is the fuel that gives you that, right? So the best capital raises are when you're able to sell a vision, raise the capital, then boom, fill it, shut it, forget it. And then, when you have your next round, then you start thinking about it again. If you don't do it right, you're thinking about it all the time, right? You become obsessed and consume it. That's one. Having said this, now there are different models. I mean, look at Zoho has been bootstrapped. MailChimp has been bootstrapped. You have a bunch of, Pallav at Fusion Charts and Paras at Wingify. They've been bootstrapped. B2B, one can tend to be much more capital efficient. You can raise a couple of rounds and then not raise anything till your IPO exit. Consumer, you have to raise. Today, to your last part of the question about who do you go to and when do you raise, I think, there are, it's quite amusing if you look at the rounds, right? Because there are angel rounds, then there is seed, then there's pre-A, then there's A, then there are a couple of years in the Valley when I was talking to a Valley investor. He said there are lowercase A's, there are uppercase A's, there are even fake A's, So my point is that ecosystem, and it can be confusing. The right way is to think about, a good way is to say that, 18 months is a good time frame for me to think about. People can say, I want to build for 10 years. Nobody's going to give the capital. Do it in bite-sized chunks, show milestones, and then go to the right people. I think today the ecosystem has become so mature that there are different pools of capital who are good at those stages, right? There are incubators, accelerators very early. There are angels and super angels, after that. We like to come in, just before the big VCs come in. And of course, now we've got growth funds after the large VCs also. So I think it's case by case. I would say the most important, Prasad, is to have personal chemistry between the founder and investor dynamic, because again, the real rubber meets the road is when things are not going well, right? It is very much a marriage. It's not only like a marriage; it is a marriage. So you really want to partner for the long term. This is not 1 year, 1 or 2 years public markets exit, right? This is building like for 10 years.
Great. There's one very interesting study that I came across a few days back, which said that the most successful founders as such, right, in terms of value creation, pre-investing to post-investing, and finally, generating monetizable value for investors, the average age is like 41 or 42 years old, right? And obviously, maybe it's partly the media is to blame for it, but we see almost ubiquitously sub 30 years old people running these startups and getting funding. But is there a change that you're seeing as India matures as a startup economy? Are you seeing that change happening? Are you seeing more mature people? Are you seeing that average age creeping towards that 41, 42 number that the study says?
Yeah, by the way, we don't, I've been ex-consultant, so I've been doing studies and decks for 10 years. But our job is to not look at studies and, focus on what's in front of us. But I'll share a couple of things. I think today you have 2X founders, serial founders who are coming out. I mean, look at Falguni at Nykaa. And, you look at others. So yes, the age has gone up, which is interesting because it shows that it's never too late to start up, number one, right? You have a lot of 2X founders that will come out from Flipkart and the others who are starting up, which is good. I think, though, that the magic of youth and starting up early that it gives you is that you're not afraid. You're not afraid to... The beauty of youth is you're not afraid to do silly things and to ask stupid questions, right? I mean, such a basic example I'll give you. If there's a fountain and, somebody's young kid runs into it, we all clap, right? And then a 15-year-old runs, you'll think the guy's nuts, right? Or something's wrong, right? Is he retarded or something? And somewhere we lose that, right? We lose that inhibition. And I think it's always a balance, right? So, keep the study aside. I think what is interesting is, I saw a very interesting tweet that if you're a master, the other day, I forgot who wrote it. If you're a master, spend time with beginners. If you're beginners, spend time with masters. I love that quote, right? Because I get my energy from talking to young founders, right? Of course, I get it from older founders also. And similarly, young founders can surround themselves with really smart, gray hair, slightly older people to learn from their mistakes, to learn from their experience. So I think the beauty of this is really when it's a melting pot, right? That is also an art. How do you construct your board? You don't just have financial investors. Can you have some senior CXO to advise you, which is almost like an uncle, like a father, but that's his job, only to advise you. You're doing the work, right? So I think it's really a balance. But it's also good to see older people coming out, which means that they are ready to take the risk, which is, I think, wonderful.
So, real or not, there are a couple of criticisms that have, been seen for the Indian investment ecosystem. One is something that you touched upon, right? People who've moved from one business to the next, right? In certain cases, the first venture failed. In Silicon Valley, it's people who are back, right? That even if your venture didn't work, it's the quality of work that you did. We didn't see that much happening so much in India, right? Are you seeing that changing? Second is that, we've always heard this when will India have its Facebook or, Uber, right? Because a lot of stuff that happens has it been done somewhere else, right? So where do you see, Bloom and yourself from that perspective, and you see both of these things changing in the overall ecosystem in India?
Absolutely. I think, one is, thanks to the internet and Twitter and after the pandemic, not thanks to that, but partly because of that, there is no information asymmetry today, right? If let's say there's a quote unquote guru like a Naval or somebody who's sharing something, or Balaji, who we are going to have at Bloom Day next week virtually, everybody has access to that, right? Doesn't matter whether you're in Pune or Palo Alto, for example, right? That's one. It's not anybody's property, right? I think that's the beauty. I think Twitter has a lot of issues also, but the beauty is that you don't have to pay for that. Everybody has it. That's one. I think Indian founders, we've always been ambitious, and which is fantastic, right? We don't have to be amongst the most, I think, talented, ambitious people in the world, right? If you look at B2B, look at Freshworks, right? You've got some massive tech IPOs there. You had Snowflake, you had Zoom, you had Slack. Now Freshworks, I'm using a particular example because 300 million ARR is staggering, right? There's not a 300 million valuation. Say they'll do an IPO reportedly. That is going to put India SaaS on the map, right? It'll be landmark like the Flipkart deal. Now, if you look at back home, our own Unacademy, right, which is becoming a unicorn, look at Byju's, which is there, but Unacademy we know far better. Look at the level of ambition, right? It's already made about 7-8 acquisitions. Look at the people that Gaurav has on the board. It's other founders of other unicorn companies. They are building. They want to build. They're not. You sometimes just have to hold them back and say, hey, listen, don't go so fast. Just build slowly. But it's not for want or lack of ambition. And I think India's time is coming. With what's happening in China now, it's not good or bad, but it's happening, right? You're seeing Chinese investors not invest so actively. And our time has come in that sense. So absolutely, I think pure consumer companies like apps and all that might tend, may take a little longer to come. But look at, we have our own coup, right? We earlier called Vocal, which is, using for developing it for democratic languages. I saw a lovely video of Anupam Kher, with the founders talking about, how democratized it is in local languages. So you have, I think, a lot of examples, but the next decade is going to be really interesting. And founders are ambitious. We just have to get enough. I think exits we have to get, and the reason is you need cash coming out also for cash to go back in, right? You can have a lot of euphoria and excitement, but money, success breeds success. So the IPO has become very important. That's why Zomato coming out, this Nazara, being overpriced is very positive, because it'll bring a lot of other non-tech and retail investors also into this and make this more mainstream.
Great. So I think, Sanjay, before we let you go, there's always this question that I asked at the end of such conversations. I mean, you're refreshingly one of the people who did talk about his big wins, because people, talk that, oh, they're all like my children. I can't, pick 2 or 3 or 5. But, when we win, we also lose some, right? So at some point, in your career, you may have let go of certain investment opportunities, which, may have become big successes. In certain cases may not. But, now that you look back, are there those 2 or 3 investment opportunities that you feel you should have boarded the train?
There are many more than 2, 3. so Bessemer Ventures has this whole famous anti-portfolio. I think they list about...
I need to interrupt you there. That is the inspiration for that question, because I met Bessemer about 4 years back, and they showed us this thing. So, and I really dig that. So, sorry, go ahead, please.
No. So I remember, we saw Meesho. I think for whatever reason, we couldn't do it. And I think it's a great company. Heard great things about Vidit, the way he's built it. I think that's one to foresee how social commerce is going to change. Postman and the developer tools is another one. The juniors from Bits Pilani, it's interesting. But we have another very interesting company in our portfolio that could do something like that. I would say we had Taxi for sure. We were looking at Ola at the same time, but we backed Taxi, so we loved it. But Ola was also raising at the same time. I think there are many, right, when you think about it. I think Delivery was a great startup in the logistics space. So you see these sometimes. So it's interesting for us. It's all a lot about timing also. Sometimes you have a thesis and you're waiting for this to play out, and the startup is raising, they have a term sheet. Sometimes you like the founders, but you don't know about how large the market can be, the different reasons. But I like to say that it's like it's like a bus, right? Don't worry about you running out of the bus. There's another bus that's going to come, right? You have to wait for the right color of the bus, the right make, the right pilot, the right driver who's driving the bus, he or she. I think also incredibly, we're seeing a lot of women entrepreneurs also, but we need far more in deep tech and sciences. It's far less. We tend to not find as many because of the STEM for some reason. But we're seeing many more. We're seeing many more mentors. Women successful CEOs are giving back, and I think that's positive, right? I mean, you're seeing many more corporate executives, angel investors, LPs, and founders who are willing to give back into that melting pot, and make more people successful.
All right, Sanjay, that kind of wraps up our questions, and I think we appreciate you taking the time. I know you're going through a busy period right now, but we're thankful that you were able to find time for us. I think right now we are all constrained by the tyranny of distance, but at some point of time, we'd love to kind of drop by and see how Bloom operates, and interact with you along with your team. And I hope we'll be able to get some time from you for that. But thank you so much for today. We really appreciate you talking to us.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Anurag, and the entire team at Prasar. I'm very happy to be here. I think it's great that you have a separate segment called the VC World, because it shows that this is not just the same as everything else. It's a very different world. You and I are sitting in t-shirts today. This is the world that we live in, and these startups have to be backed, and it's great to see you all also covering them from a I just say that we're all, it's like Shakespeare's seven stages, or it's like a play, right? All of us have a different cast to play. Somebody gives money, somebody gives advice, you're covering them, but we are on the same stage. And I think it's nice to recognize, important to recognize the role that you all also play to help these, to be the cast of supporting characters to help these startups, get from point A to point B.
Sure, wonderful thoughts to wrap that up, Sanjay. I think you're doing something wonderful, and we'll contribute where we can to our initiatives. But great speaking to you, and we look forward to staying in touch with you.
Thank you, Prasad.